Okay, thank you all for joining me this Saturday morning. And I will be talking about how Chennai can be more resilient. Let me start with a few words on 100 Resilient Cities. This is a Rockefeller Foundation initiative. We are about 5 years old. Rockefeller Foundation, of course, is about 105 years old. We are 90 cities across the world at this point in time. And in India, we have 4 resilient cities. That's Chennai, Surat, Jaipur, and Pune. Each city has a chief resilience officer with a small team, a tiny team that works with the government. I am the chief resilient officer for Chennai, and I work with the Greater Chennai Corporation. I sit in the same office as the commissioner, Dr. Karthikeyan. So why cities? Because we believe that cities are the future. In the 1800s, just 10% of the world's population lived in the cities, but that's grown to 54% in 2017 and is slated to touch 75% in the year 2050. But there is an opportunity here because 75% of the infrastructure that will exist in 2050 has not been built as yet. And if we accept that urbanization will happen, then we need to ensure that the urbanization that happens is planned, is healthy, and it's green. So the time to build resilience is now, and that seems to be the motto that we built across our cities. So what is resilience? This is a definition that has been put together by Dr. Rodden, who literally wrote the book on resilience. So it says resilience is the ability of a person, community, forest, any system to bounce back or bounce forward after a disruption. Now, all of us in our personal lives have been through the curveballs that life throws at us, the little twists and turns that we don't expect. And I think many of us, most of us, have really bounced back. But I want to talk a little bit about the concept of bouncing forward. And this is really based on the fact that a little adversity can actually be good for you. I've seen this happen when the forest fires happen around my farm. So as you know, earlier this year, we've had some really bad forest fires in the Eastern Ghats. And with land and the forests around the farm, fortunately, the farm didn't catch fire, but the hills all around being completely devastated by fire. But 6 weeks later, with the rains, the grass grew back greener, healthier, and juicier. How do I know this? Because the wild elephants that we have in our valley don't come to the farm anymore. So they head out to the hills to feed off the green grass. So the concept of not just bouncing back, but to bounce forward, because adversity can be actually good for you. Another definition of resilience that I love, it says resilience is the underlying, undying spirit of every human endeavor. So resilience is much more commonplace. It's not some evolved concept that people talk of and drop the word resilience from time to time. It's the undying spirit of every human endeavor. But what is urban resilience has been fine-tuned a bit to say the capacity of individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, and systems within a city to survive, adapt, and thrive no matter what kinds of chronic stresses and acute shocks they experience. So here, the original definition of resilience really spoke about shocks, which are in a city's context only restricted to disasters, to floods and storms and tsunamis and earthquakes. But the city does go through everyday stresses as well. Overpopulation, water is a huge stress, traffic, informal settlements, unmanaged growth, pollution, and so on. So this definition of urban resilience takes that into consideration. So what are qualities that build resilience? So adaptability, vulnerability, dedication, discipline, optimism, patience as linked to sustainability, flexibility as linked to redundancy, and adamancy. Let me pause here for a minute to talk about a couple of these qualities that may need some explanation. For example, vulnerability. So the classic example of vulnerability is that quite often you find that the more vulnerable you are, the more resilient you become. The example here is of children growing up in the streets of our country in India are far more resistant to or immune to disease than children growing up in the developed countries. That's an example of why vulnerability is a quality that builds resilience. Then, of course, in terms of patience, when we talk about building resilience, we're talking about sustainability, sustainable projects or initiatives within a city. And that means you're looking at a project that is holistic, that's comprehensive, that is inclusive, and requires a great amount of rigor and a great amount of process. And that requires patience. And we're talking about timeframes that are very different from the kind of timeframes that we are used to in advertising. Where short term for us is 7 years, mid-term is 15 years, and long term is 30 years. So we're looking at decades really. And then you'll understand why patience is a quality that we adhere to. Finally, on redundancy, I need to spend a little time to tell you, in our minds, redundancy, the classic definition of redundancy is the state of being no longer needed or useful. Yeah. But redundancy is in the context of resilience, is one of the key pillars. And when we talk of redundancy, we are really talking of building in fail-safe backup or support systems that are not always required, but kick in during times of need. I'll be talking a little bit more about this to explain this a little further in a couple of slides. Amongst this lot, I'm saying vulnerability, patience, flexibility, and especially redundancy. So what are the symbols of resilience? For us, women, men are definitely physically stronger, but I think when it comes to mental strength and resilience, women are far, far superior. And I'm not saying this because it's the right thing to say. I'm saying this because I completely believe in this. And I've been fortunate in my life, to be surrounded by women who've been very strong and who've come through the ups and downs of life, have shined through the ups and downs of life. We believe that this is a strong symbol of resilience. Then, of course, here's an interesting one, the average student. The thinking here is that the average student, as compared to his brilliant classmate, and I'm not talking about the guy who's at the top of the class, but a guy who's truly bright, to him, quite often, anything that he achieves comes quite easily as compared to his less gifted classmate, who has to struggle a bit and work much harder to achieve the things in life. But as life progresses, one finds that when one is faced with situations, when life throws a curveball at you, and you can't be prepared for everything, then it's the less gifted student who, because of the adversities that he's faced in life, is able to get up and bounce back once they've fallen. Then two examples of symbols of resilience from nature. I spoke about burnt grass already, and I've seen this personally happen. After it's been completely burnt, it really bounces back or bounces forward and grows back healthier, greener, and juicier. Finally, the lungfish, found largely in Africa, but also in parts of South America and Australia. It's called a lungfish because this fish's lungs actually builds in redundancies. It allows the fish to not just breathe underwater, but in the event that it needs to breathe air, it allows it to breathe air as well. And in Africa, when times are hard and drought has been around for 3 years, it actually walks from one pond to another in search of water. And finally, when the water dries out, it has the capacity to live in a cocoon of mud without food or water for as long as 6 years. And one of the most striking videos that I've seen on National Geographic is of a village in Africa, which had been through drought for a period of 3 years, and then it started raining. And out of the mud walls of one of the huts in the village came the lungfish, which had survived in that wall for 3 years and then swam away with the rainwater. This is a symbol of resilience. But what does the concept of resilience really mean when it comes to building resilient cities? It means building redundancies within those cities, and it means building resilient citizens. So what do I mean by saying building redundancies? To quote an old Tamil phrase, which I think Sridhar will understand, "Oru kalla rendu manga," which really means one stone and two mangoes. The English phrase is killing two birds with one stone, but I'd rather stay with this. And here are some simple examples of what I'm talking about. The story of Chandra Swami, this is Suguna's husband, who is single-handedly completely transformed the locality in which he lives. Not just his road, which is called Beach Road in Valmiki Nagar, but the entire Valmiki Nagar beach. And there's a really nice case study on this, which I can share with you or mail you after this presentation. But what I want to really emphasize on is just one thing that catches the essence of one stone, two mangoes, is the stormwater drains that he redesigned on his street and along the beach. Now, our concept of a stormwater drain, and most people's concept of a stormwater drain, is to quickly take away the rainwater as fast as possible and empty it out into the sea or into the water bodies. But the stormwater drains that Chandaswamy designed are designed to first actually regenerate, recharge the groundwater table first, and only carry the excess water to the sea or to the rivers. So it's a classic case of building resilience into design of stormwater drains. And the other is the story of green energy and net metering. Now, over the last, I think just 2 weeks, Mr. Vikram Kapoor, who's the Energy Secretary of Tamil Nadu state, has announced that we can do net metering in the state. And what this really means is that if you install a solar system in your flat or in your house, you no longer need batteries. You can actually connect to the city grid, and all the extra solar energy that you generate, you can give back to the grid and then take from the grid as and when you need. So the resilience quotient here again is very high. And at the end of your 2-month billing cycle, you get a net bill, which is net of what you've given in terms of power and energy to the city grid and what you've taken from it. So here's a visual example of what I've been talking of. This is a water square in Rotterdam. It's a flood storage infrastructure that is part of the city's integrated flood management strategy. But when the floods are not there, it's also a community gathering place with green spaces, as you can see. I want to share with you now 2 case studies that are happening as we speak. As you know, Chennai is in troubled waters. We will be a water-stressed city by the year 2025, and that's just 7 years to go. The question really is, how can Chennai evolve and administer holistic water conservation and management practices to mitigate the city's many water woes? And the background to this is we've oscillated between droughts and floods. In 2015, we had our worst floods ever. And then in 2017, we had our worst drought ever. So we're obviously not managing our water very well. And then, of course, informal and formal encroachments on all our water bodies and the Palikarne Marsh. The picture on the left with the flamingos is really what's left of the Palikarne Marsh. The marsh, as you know, is a precious commodity because it actually absorbs water during the rains and then releases it slowly into the lakes and water bodies around it. In the 70s, the Palikarne Marsh was 6,000 hectares. We are now down to just 500 hectares. And who is responsible for this? The government themselves, to a large extent. We have one of our largest garbage dumps on the Palikarne Marsh. 200 acres of the Palikarne Marsh just for a garbage dump. Then our entire IT corridor has been built on the Palikarne Marsh. So little wonder that we have floods, because this was the system that used to absorb the rain that we get during the southeast and the northeast monsoons. Then, of course, we tend to treat our water bodies like dump yards. So sewage and garbage are being dumped into our water bodies, causing extreme pollution. The Adyar River is dead, the Combe River is dead. The Kosisthalia, which runs through the northern part of Chennai, still has some life in it. And of course, we exploit our groundwater. When we moved into this house, where I'm speaking from in 1972, which is right next to the sea, there was an aquifer that was about 42 kilometers long and about a kilometer wide, and we could tap water at just 6 feet, sweet water at 6 feet. Now you can't get water even at 90 feet, and when you do, salt water is intruded in. So there's saltwater intrusion into this aquifer as well. So the problem really is that we need to improve our water supply. That's one. That's the per capita water supply needs to be improved. Then, of course, we don't reuse or recycle our water at all. And research has shown that just by recycling 30% of the water that we use, we can meet Chennai's water needs. And as the city grows into its very urban areas, we are currently at about 1,200 square kilometers, and it's slated to grow to 8,800 square kilometers. And we're growing into our water catchment areas. So there is a need to restore, protect, and reintegrate the water bodies in our catchment areas in a sustainable manner. And also to understand what technologies and processes can we identify that will assist in decentralizing wastewater infrastructure, and how do we aggregate ongoing efforts, initiatives, and expertise and institutionalize government's ability to coordinate and leverage them. So that's the problem, and here's a possible solution that we hope we have. This is an initiative that we brought to the city of Chennai about 4 months ago. We've been here in the city only for the last 9 months. This is an initiative launched by the Special Envoy for International Water Affairs, Henk Ovink. He's also the Dutch water ambassador. The Dutch Foreign Ministry is involved. There's the UN World Bank High-Level Panel for Water and other global partners who have selected Chennai as one of the 3 cities in Asia to participate in the Water as Leverage, a program that addresses water crisis in urban areas. Water as Leverage will provide the catalytic first millions in investment with the aim to develop a holistic, comprehensive, and inclusive strategy that looks at every aspect of Chennai's water issues, from data, which is lacking, to monitoring, encroachment, storage, recycling, reuse of surface and groundwater, and urban expansion. Just a little bit more history here, and truly history. The thing is that in water catchment areas of Kanchipuram and Tiruvallur, we have about 4,000 water bodies that are part of an cascading, integrated, traditional water system that is over 1,000 years old. And we ruined it through encroachments and pollution. So what will Water as Leverage do for Chennai? It's actually a call for action, a competition really, that was issued on Earth Day, that's 22nd April 2018, to internationally operating multidisciplinary teams consisting of urban planners, climate and water experts to develop innovative, bankable and implementable design proposals. The focus will be to build on an ancient traditional system of integrated cascading water systems that I just spoke of, and to align with fragmented and existing initiatives on water and catalyze development in the water sector. So we are hoping that a program like this will put Chennai on the world water map and bring international attention to Chennai, just like they did with Cape Town. I think almost every citizen in Chennai heard about how water stressed Cape Town is. So it will bring international attention. It will also give us a flagship initiative around which we can address the water woes of Chennai. Right now, it's being addressed in a very, very fragmented manner by the government, by civil society, and sometimes even academia, like IIT Madras stepping in. So this, we believe, will help us focus our issues and have a common goal. And what is interesting here is that on the 18th of June, which is just 2 days from now, this consortium, various consortiums that consist of water designers, water organizations, some of the best in the world, urban planners and financial institutions coming together to present their conceptual design to address Chennai's water woes. And we will choose 2 of those consortiums, and Water as Leverage will give each one of them 200,000 euros, which is not a lot of money, but to take those conceptual designs and convert them to implementable designs. And the other unique feature here is that the Asian Investment and Infrastructure Bank, AIIB, is a partner in this initiative. So by the time we take it from concept to and implementable design, the funds are also ready. Why is the resilient quotient here high? Well, largely because if you look at it, it is a holistic, comprehensive, inclusive water strategy to address Chennai's water woes. But let me highlight this point. If you talk to the water leadership in Chennai, Metro Water and CRRT, which is the Chennai River Restoration Trust and so on, they all believe that desalination is the way to go because it is the most certain source of supply of water to the city. But that's looking at it very unidimensionally because that doesn't solve the problem of floods. That doesn't solve the problem of regenerating a water table. However, this holistic way of looking at it, by regenerating the lakes in our catchment areas, by cutting down on pollution, by increasing the holding capacity, will also prevent floods from happening in our city. And if you ask civil society about their thoughts on desalination, they'll say that we send millions of gallons of rainwater, fresh water into the sea during the monsoons. And now we're spending millions through desalination to extract that fresh water out of seawater. So they don't believe it's a sustainable way to go about it. Then, of course, Mohan, this will be of some interest to you. 3 weeks ago, I was in Bellagio in Italy, attending a summit that was organized by the Rockefeller Foundation at the Rockefeller Center, which was on the banks of Lake Como. Absolutely wonderful place used by writers and artists to come and spend time there and be inspired by the beauty in the place. For us at Chennai, we met an Australian decentralized wastewater treatment company called BioGill. And by some strange stroke of luck or stroke of fate, they have a manufacturing facility out of Chennai as well. And I know the gentleman who runs that facility. So the resilient quotient here is high because what BioGill and John West, who is the chairman, has offered is a compact, modular, natural, cost-effective system of wastewater treatment that is tailor-made to treat raw sewage being let into our water bodies from over 1,000 legal and illegal inlets. So instead of piping all these water or sewage from all these outlets to a central sewage treatment plant, which is very expensive, you can treat the water as it is coming into our rivers and water bodies at source. And the microbes from the treated water, when released into the water bodies, which is what we need to do, will continue to clean up the water in our rivers and lakes. So the vision for Chennai is, and this came from the Dutch Water Ministry, they said Chennai can be the water capital of Asia. We have a vision of Chennai as a water surplus city by the year 2030 that achieves equitable access to water for all, a city that grows from its current 1,189 square kilometers to its slated 8,800 square kilometers by carving a future around its water bodies, where healthy and green urbanization results in our water bodies becoming public spaces that bring joy and pride and not shame and disease, where native species of flora and fauna regain lost ground and flourish, and where the traditional integrated system of cascading water bodies is valued and re-established, and our rivers and catchment areas restored to meet the water needs of all sections of society in a sustainable manner. So now that I've spoken about the first aspect of it, let me now move to building resilient citizens. Those of you who know Tamil Nadu and know the Chennai citizen won't be surprised by what I'm saying. The Chennai citizen is a non-aggressive, soft-spoken, religious, loyal, hardworking, and conservative citizen. Not confrontational and prefer to look the other way, literally turn the other cheek when they see garbage on the streets, for example. They have a great ability to live with shocks and stresses. I call it passive resilience. So how do we turn passive resilience to active resilience? How do we get their civic consciousness higher is what we're looking at. So how do we get the citizens of Chennai to care about and engage with civic issues such as solid waste management? The city generates about 5,000 metric tons of solid waste every day. The background, of course, we dump in our water bodies, garbage. This is really on the Palikande Marsh, which is a dump yard. We clog our stormwater drains with garbage. We litter without thinking twice. And it's just not the poor who are doing this. I've seen plastic bottles being thrown out of BMWs and Mercedes-Benz cars. And we do minimal or no segregation at source. And why is that important? Because segregation at source can reduce waste by 70%. Technically, it can be zero waste, but we are saying to begin with, segregate at source and reduce waste by 70%, we would have achieved a lot. So how do we do this? How do we get our citizens to meaningfully engage with civic issues like solid waste segregation? And we came up with this, which is an urban horticulture and roof gardening initiative. This we originally started with the University of British Columbia, but now that the project has taken off, it's not being implemented as yet, but we've got the Greater Chennai Corporation who are extremely supportive of this. We have the Smart Cities mission behind this. We have the State Horticultural Department backing us. We also have the State Department for the Empowerment of Women. So what is urban horticulture? Those of you who are familiar with Chennai, you'll know that we build solid concrete buildings. And you can huff and puff at it, and all the cyclones can come, but our buildings stay in place. So we have literally thousands of acres. At the last census, I think, which was in 2011, we had over 30,000 acres of concrete flat spaces on roofs that can be converted to vegetable gardens, not just roof gardens, but vegetable gardens. And the idea here is to start with 2 localities where we get good buy-in from the resident welfare associations and make them model localities for urban horticulture. We're also talking to the Chennai Corporation because they have 200 corporation schools to encourage students to take up vegetable gardening and rooftop farming in order to promote a value-based education and to supplement the government of Tamil Nadu's nutritious noon meal program. And finally, the corporation has come forward and said, look, we have parks in every locality in Chennai, and please use those parks to create an awareness for this program. And why are we so excited about it? Because the resident quotient here is extremely high. To begin with, there is public awareness and participation, and we believe in a meaningful manner, it will help them look at solid waste and to segregate waste at home and use the organic waste to create compost to fertilize their vegetable gardens. It takes care of nutrition and food security. Green energy, because the emphasis on the terrace will also bring an awareness to go into solar. And now with net metering, I think more roofs in Chennai will turn to solar. Pollution control, as more concrete spaces become green spaces, the carbon footprint for the city will be reduced. Livelihood generation and water conservation. Again, the emphasis on the terraces will then lead to rainwater harvesting, will then regenerate groundwater supplies. So what's the vision for 2030? We see a Chennai where every terrace has a vegetable garden, where concrete spaces blossom into green spaces, cooling the city, where rainwater harvesting results in mitigating the effects of water scarcity, where our citizens learn to be responsible for their city and start believing that they too can make a positive difference, where reduce, reuse, and recycle become a way of life, where we work to and join hands to create a better, more livable, more resilient Chennai. I think one of our what we call discovery areas, we've finished our preliminary resilience assessment over the last 8 months. And one of our core discovery areas is civic engagement. We believe that no large-scale, meaningful change can happen in Chennai without the active support of our citizens. And one of the slogans that we're using to incite people and get them motivated or poke them to become more civic conscious is this. It says, Namma Chennai, lift a finger before you point a finger. And that's largely because we have the habit of pointing fingers and saying, look, it's your problem, it's not ours. But as you've seen with this particular case study, civic or citizen participation can actually reduce solid waste as much as 70%. So in summary, a resilient city needs to build in redundancies. A resilient city needs resilient citizens. And a resilient solution is a long-term, sustainable, holistic solution. And to add to that, we know that smart city is a buzzword, but what smart is to smart city? Common sense is to a resilient city. And it really takes me back to the slide, the second definition of resilience, where I said it's the underlying and undying spirit of every human endeavor. Resilience is all around us, really. I'd like to end with a quote from a fairly famous gentleman who's written many, many centuries ago, which has shades and echoes of resilience in it. It says, sweet are the uses of adversity, which like the toad, ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel in his head. And this, our life, exempt from public haunt, finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. For me, this really captures in many ways the essence of resilience, because we talk about how adversity can really help you, strengthen you, make you more resilient to not just bounce back, but bounce forward. And of course, the good in everything. You know, I often say that cynicism is the armor that we wear to keep happiness at bay. And when you're dealing with complex issues like water conservation for the city of Chennai, it's important to have a positive frame of mind to say, look, I can engage with this and make a difference. To embrace the complexity, not get drowned in it, but to engage with it in a positive way, take small steps and to actually make a difference. So that brings me to the end of my presentation.